Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwalt, and I'm honored to be joined this week by author and educator Dennis Covington. Dennis is the author of 6 books, and his work has appeared in numerous periodicals. An award-winning author, Dennis also taught for 20 years at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and since 2003, he has been professor of creative writing at Texas Tech University. Dennis often writes about the South, spirituality, and religion. Welcome, Dennis. I thank you for joining us today. I know you've had a busy couple of days here at our university.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful and very different from Texas, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I'm honored to have you here. I know it's been, I want to talk about your latest book, Revelation.
Okay.
But I first learned about you, like many people, over 20 years ago when you published Salvation on Sand Mountain. I was teaching a course on Appalachian religion.
Really?
Yes.
At that time?
Yeah, and that, that book was very important, both to the study of Appalachian religion and American religion, really.
Yeah.
For those who maybe aren't familiar with it, it's about snake handling, in particular your interaction with a snake handling community.
Right.
Yeah, tell me how you got started or interested in writing about this snake handling group.
Well, actually, I was stringing for the New York Times, and I was to give each week some ideas about what might be stories. And this particular week, there were 3 ideas that I gave my editor. One of them, the one that I wanted to do, was about the first black mayor of Birmingham, who looked like he was going to be under federal indictment. And I thought that was a big national story. The second thing was a murder of 2 young people, and it seemed to be involved in Satan worshiping or something weird. And I thought, yeah, man, that's great. I'd love to do that. The third one was the trial of a snake handling minister who had attempted to murder his wife with rattlesnakes.
Oh my.
And I thought they just want,
That's sort of sensational and bizarre, right?
And confirm some ideas about Southern lunacy, you know. But that's the one my editor wanted. So I went to the trial. Not a very interesting trial. I mean, except for the snakes, of course. but he had clearly tried to kill his wife with rattlesnakes, and he was convicted and sentenced to 99 years in prison because he had some previous felony convictions. Oh. But what interested me were the members of the church who were there at the trial, and I talked with them, during recesses and everything, and they lacked very little formal education. They were extremely poor, but they were wonderful people, and they knew their Bible forwards and backwards, and so I got really interested in it.
And now, so for the benefit of those who may not know much about snake handling as a religious ritual, folks who do this are responding to a verse from the 16th chapter of Mark.
Yes.
And it seems to be a command from Jesus that people will know their faith if they handle serpents, if they drink poison and wouldn't be harmed, and if they speak in tongues. Is this right. the verse that these folks respond to? Absolutely.
And there's, the verse says in the King James translation, of course, believers shall take up serpents. Right. Shall take up serpents.
Which sounds like a command.
Exactly. Right? If they drink any deadly thing, it shall not harm them. Mm-hmm. So not many of the snake handlers actually drink the strychnine, although some have died and do that. But
and some drink the strychnine and don't seem to suffer ill effects.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of deaths, but I was warned when I was up at a church up in West Virginia. They're tough up there. And one of the snake handlers told me, don't drink what the woman preacher, has mixed up, because she mixes it real strong. So I didn't do it.
And just to clarify, when these folks handle snakes, these are deadly snakes. They're rattlesnakes, copperheads,
absolutely,
and other poisonous reptiles.
Right.
Oh. Yeah. Now, to make this story more interesting, once you got involved with the snake handling groups, you yourself actually took up serpents on 2 or 3 occasions, I think.
Yes. And
what made you do that?
What made me do that? Yeah. Well, all I can tell you is the truth, and that is I was under an anointing of the Holy Spirit.
And this is the language these folks use.
Yes.
An empowerment by the Holy Spirit.
And it is exactly what happened to me. In fact, the first one is the biggest rattlesnake I'd ever seen. And Brother Carl, my sort of mentor, you know, he had brought it in that morning. He said, "Look, I just caught it out in the woods this morning. It's his first time in church."
Oh my goodness. So these are not snakes that have been petted or trained or you know, they are real live, dangerous, poisonous, venomous reptiles.
Yes, and handlers die all the time. Pumpkin Brown died.
Right, right.
And his wife died of snake bite, both of them.
So what did you feel when you were, I read your book. I remember you say something like you felt like you and the snake became one, that the snake was somehow an extension of your being. What were you feeling in that moment when you were holding that rattlesnake?
Well, it's spiritual ecstasy. It comes from disappearing, essentially. I was no longer there.
Right.
And I couldn't, I didn't hear the music anymore. I didn't, it was just this utter peacefulness and quiet, and a sense that had disappeared. I felt like the shrinking man, you know, the incredible shrinking man, when everything goes away.
That sounds to me like a description that maybe a medieval mystic might make. So this is really a mystical experience where you kind of merge with the divine and the self goes away.
Precisely. And I mean, it's real. Now, I don't go to church anymore.
Anywhere. But certainly not in the snake handling church.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
But I cannot deny that I experienced something that was real, that was spiritual in nature. And, you know, there's no protection.
Right.
I mean, it's not like he's saying, "I'm going to protect you, and when you do this," God is simply saying, "Believers shall do it."
Right. Did you have any idea you would do that, or did this take you completely by surprise?
It was completely by surprise. I knew that Brother Carl was aiming in that direction. I mean, I knew that he would be, you know, fulfilled if I did that, but I had no intention of doing it.
Right.
Not at all. In fact, I tried to avoid his eyes the whole time.
And then you maintained some contact with this group before you finally left the snake handling group. And
oh yeah. And even after the book came out, you know, Brother Carl, first time I saw him after the book came out, he said, "Well, Brother Dennis, first time I read it, I didn't like it. And second time I read it, he said, I thought I could see what you were doing." And he said, the third time I read it, I thought, "Oh, Brother Dennis, you did a good job." And I love that.
Well, I know that some of your critics have pointed out that you broke every rule of journalism and anthropological writing, that you crossed some kind of line, that you went native.
Well, the good thing is I never had a journalism course.
Okay, so you don't know.
I never worked.
Right.
I mean, I just came out of the blue. The first journalism I wrote, it was from El Salvador. I wrote it in first person, present tense. Can you know?
So you broke a lot of rules.
A lot of rules, right. I didn't know.
Well, your writing's so engaging, and I think the great thing about Salvation on Sand Mountain was, had you not had that experience, it wouldn't have been quite so interesting and mesmerizing, really, in many ways.
Well, thank you.
So it was a kind of unique combination of third-person account, yet first-person experience.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that set your book apart. I want to get to your new book, but just a couple other questions. You mentioned that the snake handlers you met tended to be marginalized, mired in poverty. So I guess they're kind of checking off all the stereotypes we tend to have of Appalachia.
Right.
In your experience, does this experience with the snake handling group tell us anything about Appalachia or about the South that goes beyond those stereotypes?
Well, it certainly should, because these people are, well, for one thing, they read the Bible. I mean, how many smart, intelligent folks in the United States have read the Bible,
Right.
and who are living by it? But you know, poverty in terms of money is irrelevant.
Right.
I mean, I'm bankrupt. You know, so what? You know, I'm a grandfather. I still love my grandkids and everything. It's not like, you know, I'm some kind of criminal hiding out in the woods.
And you're still very active, just published a new book. So
Right.
why don't we take that as a segue to talk about, give me the full title, Revelation.
A Search for Faith in a Violent Religious World.
The Search for Faith in a Violent Religious World. So you're really writing here about the intersection of faith and danger and violence.
Right.
And when I first picked up your book, I thought, well, you're going to talk about the question whether or not religious movements are inherently violent, but that's not at all really what you were looking at here. You went into violent regions that are marked by lawlessness and violence, like Aleppo, Syria, drug-infested places in Mexico, and found faith there.
Yeah.
Would you comment on that? What motivated you to do this? Because you weren't, I mean, this was your idea, right? You were a freelance writer going to Syria. How in the world did you get the idea to do that?
Well, I'm addicted to war, unfortunately, I think, although I'm too old now to go to places like that. But it's that first verse of Hebrews 11 that has always mystified me. Because, you know, we think of faith as being a set of beliefs,
Right.
or interchangeable with beliefs in something. But Hebrews 11:1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The substance. I couldn't get that out of my head. I mean, what, like this? Substance, something you can touch, something you can, you know. And so I decided I wanted to go look for it. Now, I misled my editor.
It's a good way to get a contract, I guess.
Yeah. I told him that I wanted to retrace the steps of St. Paul on his mission trips to the wider world. And I thought that along the way, it would pass through places where the cultures had changed a lot and where, you know, there were confrontations between Christianity and Islam and this kind of stuff. Right. Okay. Well, he bought the idea. What I didn't tell him was that the reason I had proposed this is so I could get to Antioch, which was where Paul's journeys began. And Antioch, which is now Antakya, Turkey, is 20 miles from the Syrian border. I wanted to get into Syria. If I told him that, I wouldn't have gotten a contract.
Right. But I bet he's happy with the result.
Yeah, he's happy.
Well, did you see yourself, I know this was part of the proposal process, but it sounds like you kind of saw yourself as a contemporary Paul. You were setting out on this journey to discover something, but to share something at the same time.
But that's, thank you, I appreciate that. But, you know, all I was doing was writing about what I saw and so forth. And but you know, Jesus wanted his disciples to see him crucified. He told them to come and watch it. And so I think instead of witnessing to our own salvation, like, oh, I got saved the other day and everything, all my sins are washed away. What about being a witness to suffering as a means of spreading the gospel?
So suffering here is key to
It is
understanding
absolutely key. And anybody who tries to separate Christianity from suffering is out of their minds. I mean,
well, that's a very different take on Christian faith than, say, what's currently popular, like the prosperity gospel.
Yeah, there you go.
So, you know, you're just kind of flipping that on its head and sort of rediscovering at the heart of Christianity this metaphor of suffering.
Yeah.
Is suffering requisite for faith? Is there in some sense, does a person have to identify with suffering in order to experience true faith?
I think, in my case, I had to witness it. I had to see it.
Right.
I didn't suffer myself, but in other respects, I've suffered during my life, as we all have.
Right.
And so we're all, it's something we got to do. Yeah, the prosperity gospel, don't get me on that.
No,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I mean,
Sorry
I
about
can't.
it. Right.
I haven't.
Well, you know, in the context of your journey here,
Yeah.
You made some very profound statements about faith, I think. One is that you said you discovered that faith is action and not the set of dogmatics or beliefs. So that you almost make faith a verb in a sense.
Yeah. Well, what I saw over there, for instance, I'll give you an example. I didn't find many Christians over there who were doing any much good for anybody, to tell you the truth. Now, it's a long way away, so, you know, that's not that unusual. Most of the good things that were being done for the people of Syria were being done by Muslims, obviously, because, but also there were a lot of Western Europeans who were doing it, very involved, who didn't believe. You know, they were not what we would call believers.
Right.
And yet they were doing the work of Jesus, you know, delivering medical supplies, food, setting up medical clinics for the refugees. You know, that's what Jesus would have been doing.
Right, right.
So we got it all turned around in this culture of ours. Whoa, can you imagine what Jesus would think? I mean, about some of these people, these preachers that go out and just, God, I'm sorry.
No, I think what you're suggesting here is that as we know the story of Jesus from the Gospels, he identified with those who were suffering in the first century. So if he were here now, who would he be identifying with? Certainly not the prosperity preachers, but rather the people that you met in Aleppo or in Mexico.
And the snake handlers.
And the snake handlers. There's a connection here, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah. You said you were addicted to war, but it sounds like it's the element of danger here that is attracting you, going back to snake handling and bringing it all the way through your experiences in Syria. There's something, it seems to me from your perspective, that is seductive about danger in the same way that faith and religion is seductive. Is there a connection there?
I think there is. Definitely there is.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus knew that his disciples were going to be subject to violence and stuff. And, you know, I mean, I haven't been crucified upside down or had my head cut off, but could have.
Sure. If the times had been different or...
First time I went into Syria, it was either the day after or 2 days after James Foley was kidnapped there. And he was ultimately, after being tortured for years, he was decapitated, the first of those. And I walked in alone.
Well, there were times when your life was in danger, and in fact, you suffered a pretty serious brain injury while in Aleppo that went undiagnosed for some time.
Yeah.
Finally, you had to have surgery for it.
Yeah, well, I was telling you, I guess I can say it on camera, I don't know. Yeah, I knew something had broken inside my head in Aleppo, Syria. There was a blast. It was a closed head injury. When I got back to the States, I went to the emergency room near my house, and I said, look, I need a CAT scan. I was in Aleppo, Syria. Something broke inside my head. They put me in the psych unit, the one that was locked up, with all the schizophrenics. I probably should have been in there anyway.
Maybe you shouldn't have told that story right off the bat.
Yeah, that might have been another way. But when I got out, the symptoms increasingly got worse, and my best friend on the faculty at Tech told me, you got to go. So I went to another one, and they immediately did a CAT scan and said, you're going to have emergency brain surgery.
And that went well, and you're back to writing, and since written Revelation.
It's a little bit. I mean, I'm not quite the same person I was.
Well, I want to ask you this question. I know you don't directly address it, and maybe you don't have to address it now if you don't want to. But do you think there's something about religion that promotes violence and danger?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, obviously, the Crusades, There are any number, you know, of wars that have been attributed. A lot of heads have rolled in history because somebody professed a belief that somebody else didn't like.
Well, and will continue, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of a pessimistic note, but I know that one of the things that you said about, I think I've got this right, faith and religion in your latest book, is that really faith, the way I read it, begins in hope, right? But you have to think that there's something worthwhile about the life we're living here in order to have faith, which normally I would think about it the other way around, that faith comes out of a sense of hopelessness. But here you're declaring that the seed of faith has to be hope.
Yeah.
Hope for the world, hope for life.
The evidence. Faith is the substance. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Wow. So there's,
So how does that, so the impetus for your book on your Revelation book was that passage from Hebrews. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. How does that compare to the impetus for your snake handler friends, that those who believe shall do certain things? Is there any correlation there in terms of the beginning of faith? And I guess, is snake handling a way of putting into action what these folks believed in the same way that the good deeds that you witnessed in Syria is putting into action a belief?
Yeah. That's a great question. And, you know, when I look at the snake handlers and I look at the war in Syria, for instance, what I'm seeing are people who are running the risk in the name of God, you know. And I think they can work to the disadvantage of humanity as it does in Syria. And it can also work in the death of snake handlers.
Right.
What do we do with that? I mean, it's an anomaly in a way. If you believe in Jesus Christ, you'll drink poison. What? I mean,
that is a dramatic step. I mean, that's really putting action, right? That's putting some real consequences on action.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder, has anybody, one of the words that comes to my mind when I think about your writing, I wonder if anybody has ever called you a prophet. Because it seems to me that when you talk about suffering and when you equate faith with suffering, that you're really being prophetic in a sense. You're bringing, because most of your readers, I would guess, are affluent, privileged. So you're bringing suffering into the consciousness of people who may not identify with suffering. And that seems to me a prophetic kind of task.
Well, thank you. It may be because I am seeing ahead that they're all going to die. You know, we're all going to die.
Right.
I mean, but I don't know.
But it is a critique in some ways on contemporary society, I guess, contemporary culture as we know it in the West.
Yeah.
So I would guess that you mentioned that when you wrote Salvation on Sand Mountain, you got feedback from people who were in the snake handling community.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have yet received feedback from the broader Christian community about your most recent work. And if whether that's been positive or negative or mixed or maybe it's too early in the game to...
Yeah, no, I have not gotten any feedback about that. I will tell you this, I worshiped with a Christian group while I was over there. They were close to Pentecostal, you know. At prayer meetings, there would be speaking in tongues, there would be healing, that kind of stuff. I never saw them. Now, I don't mean to be critical, but I never witnessed them doing anything for the Salvadoran people, for the refugees or anything. These folks, they were sweet, kind, good people, and I admire them, but they seem mainly devoted to finding the best place to live and the best restaurants to eat at, you know.
And that's where your message becomes prophetic. Because it sounds like you're suggesting that a person without the belief structure can be a more faithful person to the message of Christ than a professing Christian.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jesus, I mean, look, you know, who did he appear to when he was resurrected?
Right.
Mary Magdalene, a woman out of whom he had cast 7 devils. And, I mean, I preached. You know, you read Salvation. I got a chance to preach.
Yeah.
Very short sermon. But, and that was my point, that women's role in the church is the same as it is for men, to spread the gospel of the living Christ, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I got one amen, by the way, and it was from Brother Carl, the preacher's wife.
She'd been waiting to hear that message for a long time.
Right.
Well, that is a kind of a rebellious message, right? And it seems like the whole kind of message of Jesus was that kind of rebellious prophetic message. So you're channeling.
I can't wait. Have you seen that movie that's just come out about her?
I have not.
Mary Magdalene?
I have not, but we should go do that after the
program. Let's do it.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you here. Only thing I want to say to you is thank you for your work, and please keep writing. I know you've got a project going, and we're looking forward to seeing more works from Dennis Covington in the future.
Thank you so much, Ozzie.
And I appreciate you joining
really
us.
appreciate it.
This has been fun.
You take care.
All right, thank you. And thank you for joining us on Religion and Life here at App TV. I want to thank our guest, Dennis Covington, for taking time out of his busy schedule to be with us today, and ask you to join us next week when my guest will be Dr. Dana Powell, who will discuss Native American spirituality. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwalt.